Hi.
Hi. How are you?
Hi. I'm good. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. It is July 1st.
It's Canada Day in some parts of this country today.
Kinda. And on Monday, it will be the 4th of July, Independence Day in America.
So a long weekend
Yeah,
here in North America.
true
Um,
that.
so I hope everyone is having a safe and great plans for the long weekend.
Absolutely. So we're doing it a little bit differently today, aren't we, Louise? Because we're not actually live.
We are because we put some boundaries around how we work, and we are not working today.
It's true. So we are not live today. So we are recording this in advance of the long weekend. And we do hope that you are being safe, that you are enjoying yourself, and that you are taking time like we are for ourselves and for our families, whatever you're celebrating or whatever you're remembering or whatever you're doing. To that end, I am curious, right? We always start the week, well, we start our week together on these Fridays, our conversations together, by by diving into reflection on the week that we just went through. And since we're doing this in advance and we actually have a live episode in between, I'm curious if we could do our reflection a little bit differently. We're coming up to the end of June. We're coming up to the end of the first half of the year. And so I'm wondering if we could just take a few minutes in our weekly wrap up at the beginning here to look and see where we are with our intentions for the first half of the year. How do you feel about that, Louise?
Oh, that sounds like a lot of fun, actually.
Cool. Do you want to start?
Sure. Um, when I look back at how I set my goals, both personal and professional business goals that I wanted to achieve, one of the things I recognized in doing that is that my year doesn't necessarily run like a calendar year, right? And so for me, it gets really hard to set those goals in January. I find January, February, and March really challenging for myself, and so I reset my goals starting in April because that just feels a lot more fruitful as we come out of the long winter here. And so when I look back, my reflection is really for the last 3 months, how have I gone? What have I done? And how am I navigating some of those personal and professional goals and intentions that I have for the rest of the year? I When I look back, I think it's really interesting that, what is the saying? Best laid plans.
Mhm. I don't know how that saying ends, but
Me either. Dot, dot, dot. And so I think that what I recognize as important is that I don't always know the how. I know the why and I know the what. Um, and to be flexible and adaptable in the how, it has been something that I've really recognized in the first part of this year. And for example, expanding my business into corporate coaching and training, I had a particular vision and what that was going to entail. And then I had an opportunity to get trained, to just fell into my lap, and to be trained and certified as a practitioner in skills for success with the government of Canada. And so that, although meets my goal, right, it keeps me moving towards the what. It keeps me attached to my why, but the how was just something that I had never even thought of. But I saw that opportunity because I knew the why and the what. And I think for me, that has been really important to hang on to and something that I'm going to move forward into this next half of the year.
That's great. I love that. And I know you and I have talked about definitely the kind of the flow between the why, the what, and the how, and how that all comes together in our lives and in our work, and where we can both use a little bit of support and growth in those areas for sure. Thanks for sharing that. And again, when you're listening to this as replay or live when we stream it on July 1st, feel free to drop into the comments your reflection on the past 6 months or the past quarter, or just for the month of June. We would love to just know how you're doing with hitting your intentions and your goals. So for me, I did the last 2 months of 2021. I did some pretty deep strategic planning, and really looking at how I wanted to grow my business in particular. There were a couple of personal things that were important to me that I also rolled into my goals, that I have for the year of 2022. I set those goals up. I set kind of a benchmarks where I wanted to be at different points for the first 2 quarters, knowing that at this halfway mark, I was going to reassess where those benchmarks were for quarter 3 and quarter 4, because there was a lot of new things that I was adding in, and it was going to be best guess. So again, kind of that how, right? That middle part of how it's unfolding allows me to then benchmark a slightly better for Q3 and Q4. So I'm more likely to hit or get close to those goals.
Right.
I will put this out there. I like to set goals, but I am not a person that's like, here's my goal, I have to hit that goal. Like, that is the opposite of me with goals. I put a goal out there, and that gives me something to work towards and to I'm going to use the word strive, but I don't mean that in terms of pushing or proving energy. That is the opposite of my energy. I do put it out there so that I do have something to work towards, and so that I can focus on. And what I was really happy about was how I set it up for myself to do this year. Was I created 6 essentially pillars or buckets that I wanted to focus on. And each quarter, each month, each week, I do have an opportunity to say, how do I want to touch this bucket this week, if at all?
Right.
There are some weeks that I don't want to touch it. There are not quarters that are months that I don't touch it, but there are definitely some weeks where I'm like, this is not in my priority stream right now. So having that ability to work this new system for myself for this first half of the year, that has been really, that's my reflection is, ooh, my system is working, because I'm seeing how far I've come towards each of my goals. And I have made forward progression towards each of my goals. Some of my goals I've already adjusted. I'm like, oh no, like I've either surpassed it or I realize it's no longer relevant for me. There was something in there that was carrying over from 2021 that in 2022 is no longer relevant. So I've said, that's not a goal I need to actually attain anymore. So having that ability to see that I've put a process in place that's working for me, and that is helping me move forward, and I'm seeing that forward momentum, is something that's really exciting, particularly being somebody who spends a lot of time responding to things and not feeling like they're always making forward momentum. So it's been a really nice place to kind of sit and reflect and create that space for myself. So
Yeah, that's great. But that recognition, right, of the system and working the system and seeing that it is working for you. But that reflection, right? Like, that's why we're here on a weekly wrap up, because there's so much power in that reflection. It's, what's gone really well, what's working, where do you make those adjustments along the way? How do you fine tune a process if you're not looking back on a somewhat regular basis to the process in general? How do you know how far you moved or how far you have yet to go if you're not looking at the data? Because it's all about data.
So I would love for us to shift just a little bit and reflect on this week's topic, which is showing up as yourself. Now, of course, we mean at work, we mean in leadership, but we also mean in totality, right? Holistically, how do you show up as yourself? How do you tap into that authenticity of self. Louise, what does it mean to you to be authentically you?
That all comes down to the question: am I living my values in a way that feels good? I think that's what it boils down to for me.
Yeah. I'm much the same. I focus a lot on values in the work that I do with individuals on teams and for myself. And honestly, when I was just talking about setting up this process for myself and creating my goals for the year, they were based on my values,
Yeah.
right? And living into my values. How do you identify what your values are? So let's even go to that place. Like if we're trying to authentically figure out how we are so we can show up in the world and lead from that place, how do you even start that process? Because I'm sure some people don't even know that.
Well, yeah, and that really is a process. It's an exercise. It's right. And there's online tools that can be great to help you bring language around your values. But taking the time to write them down, what's really important to you. Values change throughout our life too. They're not something we're born with. It's something that it's important at a certain stage in our lives. And so revisiting that, but then defining what those words mean to you, right? You know, curiosity is one of my values, but really knowing what that means. How do I live that value of curiosity? That's important for me. Yeah, if you don't have a definition around what the word means, it gets really hard to use it as a touchstone or a marker along your way. How about you, Kim?
Yeah. So there's some great tools out there. There is the VIA character strengths, which really is its values in action, which is a great tool. I use that with all of my clients. And I use it for myself. And one of the things that I do that I practice personally, and I again practice with my clients, is annual reviews of your values in action. As well as your, the other tool I use is Clifton Strengths. So it looks at where our strengths are and how those are showing up for ourselves, because those can also change. They don't change quite as, I would say they don't change as quite as often. And it's not like your values change like the wind, but when there are major life changes, our values do change. Our strengths change as our values change. And as we, find new areas, new zones of genius for ourselves, like what is working for us. So those strengths can change as well. So those are ones that I definitely look at in terms of how to guide myself and my clients. But I do that it's an annual review. Like we have to look at this each year, and I look at them again quarterly, monthly. How am I living these things?
Right. So tell me a little bit about, knowing your values is one thing. How do you bring them forward in leadership, or this idea of showing up as your authentic self at work?
Yeah. So my top value is love. So when you think of a leader, do you think of love? I don't usually think of leaders as showing up with love. And so that was always a hard thing for me as a leader to say, well, how do I lead from this place? Right? How do I use curiosity? How do I use kindness? How do I use appreciation of excellence? And for me, appreciation of excellence comes in it's aesthetic in many ways. It's beauty, it's seeing a beautiful sunset, that kind of thing. When I'm living those values as a leader, I look for how first I'm showing up. So when I say I lead with love, it is because I show up with an open heart. I show up heart-centered. To me, being heart-centered is being open to seeing the humanity that's in the room. It's being open to understanding that as individuals, we all bring in our own stuff. And so what can I do to diffuse some of the stuff that comes into the workplace, into the team, into the group, before we get started on the work that we're doing together? How do we diffuse that? Not leave it at home, not check it at the door, because we are authentically who we are. We are a whole being. And so when I lead with love, it's coming from that place of meeting somebody heart to heart and saying, okay, you're going through a really tough time at home. I hear that. I understand that. What's your actual bandwidth look like? If I see the emotions going up and down, I understand what's going on, and let's work on that, right? It gives me an opportunity to meet them heart to heart where they are. So that's how I tap into knowing, deeply knowing my values and showing up and leading from them, instead of showing, like, if I showed up and tried to just be very structured and ignore the fact that people bring anything else into the room and don't try and meet them heart to heart, I'm a miserable leader that way.
Right.
Right. So how about you, Louise? How does it show up for you?
Well, I find it really interesting in that once you know what your values are, now you have the tool to figure out how you show up as yourself, right? Without those values, I think it gets really really foggy on like, what does that actually mean to be your authentic self at work? Finding yourself in a corporate culture that doesn't align with your values, I think, is when we really start to see this idea that authentic leadership just isn't a thing, and that it doesn't work where you're at. And I think that is because you're misaligned. For me, it is exactly the same thing. And I think it's the same for everyone. There are there's lists of like hundreds of values out there, right? I think I've seen like sheets 250, 350 words that you can use to describe your values. You're going to have a list of like 5 or 6 at the most that are really that top of the list, that are really that important. And so you defining what that looks like, now you get to show up in a very different way than someone beside you. And I think that's what we talk about when we talk about being authentic. We're talking about being true to those values in a workplace environment. And that's, yeah, I think that's the core of it. And figuring out what that is. Your leadership style is vastly different from mine. That doesn't make us ineffective. It makes us different leaders, and we're trying to figure out how to work together, how to work in an environment in that shares hopefully many of the same values as yourself, and trying to figure out what that all looks like and how to really step into your own. There's so many benefits from being that authentic leader. And when I say leader, I mean like any level of leadership, right? From the
Everyone leads
to the boardroom, it doesn't really make a difference. It's really about how are you making a difference at work by living those values and being true to who you are.
Yeah. So I know before we started, I shared this quote with you. It's a quote by Sheryl Sandberg. True leadership stems from individuality that is honestly and sometimes imperfectly expressed. Leaders should, we know we don't love should here, but leaders should strive for authenticity over perfection. I'm curious if that kind of speaks into what you and I have been saying, if you feel that speaks into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like when you think about the kind of the leader, the qualities of leadership, right? Like what a leader really is at the end of the day, and how do you be an effective leader? It all stems from authenticity. None of it stems from perfection. There is not a quote unquote perfect leader out there. And if you think you are, then you're not growing or learning. And that's a very fixed mindset, and not one that's going to grow you, your team, or your organization. So authenticity, I think, really leans into all of those great things that make a great leader, like building trust with your team, right? You talked about empathy. When you are leading from from the heart, you're really empathizing, you're listening, you're creating space for people, you're keeping them engaged and interested in the work that they do. And now you're modeling what you want your team to be doing, or your peers, or maybe even your leaders, and how you want them to be showing up. There's so many benefits that I think we just pop over sometimes and just say, that's not that's not really a space, but it really is.
Yeah. It's interesting because in this quote, the two words that pop out for me are individuality and imperfection. And I think too often as leaders, as individuals, even if we don't consider ourselves leaders, we are leaders. Everybody's a leader, in my opinion. And we're all individuals. There is no time in my lifetime, in your lifetime, where anybody else is going to have the exact same experiences that you are or that I am. We are individuals. We see the world through our own lens, through no other lens. There's nobody else out there. So individuality is really important. And if you're trying to emulate somebody else's leadership style, it's not going to work. You need to show up authentically as yourself, because that's the only way that you can truly lead, right? And that place of imperfection, none of us are perfect. You know, you just said that there's no perfect leader, right? There's no perfect person. And so when we can start to embrace our imperfections, our quirks, you know, I remember we did one of our superpowers luncheons, and we talk about the fact that our quirks, our weirdness, our eccentricities, our imperfections are what make us so human and so unique and so wonderful and so us, right? And that's to be celebrated. And when we can own ourselves on a really deep level and say, you know, through knowing ourselves, for sure, for understanding what our ethics and our visions and our values and all of that, when we actually deeply, deeply, deeply know ourselves and can embrace ourselves as the imperfect individuals we are, it's so cool how we can show up and lead from that space, because it just comes so much more naturally.
Yeah, it takes a lot less energy to lead and lead with your values than it does to not. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Very cool. It's funny. I feel like so we've titled this episode Showing Up as Yourself, but I feel like it should really be called Lead from Your Values. Because I think that's what we're both saying is, when you go in and you own those values, right? And you start from that place, you can't help but be authentic and show up as yourself.
Yeah. And like, what a benefit to the world, really. Think about the benefit to, right? Let's even bring it down on a more micro level. And what a benefit to your organization when you're showing up with your own individual, unique perspective. That's all about growth. It's all about opportunity. And more organizations and companies need that flexibility and that adaptability to continue to grow and survive, which is really, at the end of the day, what we all want, right? Is to grow and survive.
Yeah. And to thrive. I'm going to put thrive in there. Right. I think a lot of us want to thrive too. Right? So many of us have stayed in that place of survival mentality. And I think one of the things that I've heard a lot coming through the pandemic has been, I'm tired of just surviving. I want to thrive. Like, I need something more. And stepping into that authentic place of what is more for me.
Yeah. And it almost becomes a fundamental, like, survival piece for you when you think about it, right? When you are needing that thriving, that growth, that's probably has a lot to do with your values and how you see the world. And then it does become a core piece of who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So on a personal journey level, right, as leaders, as people as entrepreneurs, Now, are there any books, any tools beyond looking at your values that have been helpful to start to uncover yourself and your self authenticity? There we go.
Yeah.
Just came up with a new term, I think.
Well, I think, you mentioned, when you try to emulate or copy someone's leadership style, that it really, it doesn't always work.
Yeah.
I take the approach of like, I want to see what great leaders are doing, and I want to incorporate what I think is great, because those are real concrete life examples, right? If I share the same values as a great leader, I get to say, oh, how are they showing up? What does that really like? How do we manifest our values into a work life? And so finding authors who speak so well about authenticity and leadership, and really understanding what do you want to bring in. You get to have a whole buffet of people who are leaders in their own way, and you get to now kind of piece that puzzle together, right? Those are those seeds that I think you get to plant your own garden with. I'm going to mention Jen Sincero, because you're a badass at life. Her whole series, she's got a great series, but that's really like that's her telling her story about how she evolved into, right, a very authentic leader and business owner, and how she did that. How about you, Kim? Any resources?
Yeah, so I think two of my favorites, Jen Sincero is absolutely one of my top three. Two of the others I would add to that are Brené Brown and Adam Grant. I personally, how I see them showing up in the world. Not that I want to emulate that, but what I want to emulate is their authenticity of
Yeah.
themselves, right? And their brains. Like their brains are amazing to me. And so my favorite one with Brené Brown is Daring Greatly. I found that to be really pivotal for me. In so many ways. So that's one of them. And then one of my favorite Adam Grant's is Originals, How Nonconformists Move the World. I find, I just, that when I first read that, I was like, oh, your brain fascinates me. And it was just, it was so helpful to me to step into seeing this idea of how we don't all have to be this cookie
Yeah.
cutter.
Yeah.
Right? And I don't have to show up the way I've seen so many do it for so long.
Yeah, I think, and then he has his newest book that's out, Think Again, really does
Oh,
start to challenge that whole idea of that there is a perfect way, right? There is not a perfect way, and to challenge ourselves to think again, to think outside the box, to incorporate others, to hear what other people are saying when we may disagree a little or a lot on what they say, really does have those foundational bits. I think when you think about, and each person is going to have their own ideal of a great leader. But when you think about a great leader, when you find someone out there who you see as a great leader, I believe they were all pioneers at one time in their leadership style, right? When you think about how they leaned in, why they're seen as great. And they're not great because they piggybacked on, they took someone else's style and put it on. They're great because they've learned their own way into leaning in, being curious, right? Living on the edge of uncomfortable, seeing how things land and growing, but they all live true to their values. And that's the great thing about, I guess, having so many values, is you get to have so many different kinds of leaders. It just makes the soup richer when there's more in it, right?
yeah, absolutely. It's that idea of being inspired or influenced versus taking somebody's leadership style and trying to put it
Yeah.
on and wear it like an outfit. It's never going to fit. It's not tailored to you.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear a lot from my clients who are looking, to level up their leadership, to get that promotion, to take it to the next step. And I often hear it's like, I can't be that kind of leader in this organization. Like, I can't work like all day and night. I don't have 70, 80 hours a week to put into my job. And I think that, if you find yourself in an organization where the expectation does not align with your values, then you're in the wrong organization. And or maybe it's time that they need somebody a little bit differently. Maybe, you setting some boundaries around what that looks like, or you living into your values is exactly what your organization is looking for and they're so hungry for. When you live into your own values, you'll quickly see if you're in the right place or not.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to being right. Sometimes we need those nonconformists. We need those people who are not going to just toe the line and be like, fine, I'll show up and I'll do it this way, even though it's out of alignment for yourself. And particularly, I think we're in we're in a stage of enlightenment, expansion, of growth, where things are of transformation, where things are changing. And we need more people in the world who are willing to be those nonconformists, who are willing to step into their authenticity, to say, this is how I want to show up. This is how I want to lead, right? It is for the good of the community, the good of the organization. So again, to go back to what we started, right? It's actually, we were having the conversation offline about, you don't want to show up. Like Louise had asked me the question about, well, what if somebody shows up kind of as an asshole? Like, are we giving them permission to being authentically an asshole?
This is myself, right?
Right? It's like, my take on that is I don't genuinely think people show up in the world intentionally being an asshole without having a lot of pain, a lot of discomfort, a lot of proving energy, a lot of fear. Like, I just don't. I may be a Pollyanna in that. They may not know how to behave any other way. They may need some suggestions and some work on how to communicate differently with different people. And that's also where somebody like myself coming in and saying, hey, heart to heart, what's going on?
Right.
Yeah. So
absolutely.
I'm not going to show up asshole to asshole. That's not my leadership style.
Well, and two, I find it interesting, right? It's like, you have to be such a hard ass to be in corporate America. You have to be, right, cutthroat to be in this business. And it's like, do you? Question mark? Like, what if you don't? What if your way was a much better way of getting business done, of being a leader, of growing a team? Right? Just because you see someone doing something in one way, it doesn't mean that's the thing that got them there, nor is it going to be the thing that gets you there. So really I'm just going to say, check yourself and get back to those values, right?
Yeah. There are lots of values. I've seen those sheets that have 200-300 words on it. And I'm like, oh, Lordy, I cannot do this part. This is overwhelming for me. But nowhere on there did I see asshole. I said, it could be I value assholes. I don't know, maybe. All right, Louise, what's your golden nugget from this week's conversation?
Well, I think, it goes back to our reflection at the beginning, but I think it also is so impactful in this, when you're in the space of trying to figure out what your own leadership style is. And that's all through that reflection. It's all through trial and error. And you had talked about it right at the beginning about reflecting on your goals, on your system, seeing that it works. And I just saw it appear over and over again as we were talking. It's like, try something, and if it's not working, adjust. Right? Get to know your values and then figure out how to manifest them into your leadership style. And that does come with trial and error, but it's that reflection piece. So that's my nugget.
Yeah, mine is that idea of values in action, right? Like it's throughout our conversation, we kept going back to this idea of our values, and you know, I had talked about individuality and imperfection, and it, when we own ourselves, when we step into our own skin, and really, I can't remember how you said it, but it's that idea of bring your own values, live your own values, and that's going to get you to where it is that you want to be as a leader, as a human. End of story.
Yeah.
So I think that's my big takeaway from my golden nugget from this
Yeah.
week.
Drop.
Boom. As always, we encourage you to let us know what your golden nuggets were from this week. We look forward to coming back to talk about a super lightweight topic next week on July 8th, which is psychological safety. It's an important conversation, and I'm glad we're going to have a chance to start to peel away some of those layers to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Can't wait. Have a great long weekend.
Thanks. Bye, everyone. You too.
Bye.